On June 9th, 2013, 6 gunshots ripped through the Harrison Lake campground. 2 tight bursts of 3 that snapped everyone out of their summer night routine. One second it was just campers, cars, and people hanging out by the water, and the next, it was pure panic. Calls started flooding in. A passing car's headlight had been shot out. A family's RV had been hit as well. And so now everyone's thinking the exact same thing. There's a shooter in the woods. Police pour into the dark woods expecting to find an armed guy mid-rampage. But when they zero in on where the shots came from, the scene doesn't match the panic whatsoever. There's just a lone truck with a camper parked off in a secluded spot, a campsite that looks like it was abandoned in the middle of the night. And then the police hear barking from inside the locked camper. Officers open it up and 2 dogs rush out. Inside the camper, they find an uninflated boat, a life jacket, and personal belongings with one name on them: Ray Salmen. But they didn't find any guns. And even more disturbingly, they didn't find Ray Salmen either. Or at least that's what they claim. But long before chaos and mystery fell over Harrison Lake, a young woman named Daniela entered a bar planning to meet someone very special. It's February of 1981, and as some of you might remember, long before Tinder algorithms decided who we were supposed to date, there was this thing called a blind date. Daniela's friends knew that she wanted to be with someone who is passionate, responsible, and of course, good with his hands. And so when Raymond, or Ray Salmen, walked through the doors, Daniela knew that she had found the one for her. And if you enjoy wilderness mysteries, by the way, you found the one channel, haha, for you. We're trying to reach 1 million subscribers this year in 2026, and so please hit that subscribe button and help us get there, especially if you are a repeat viewer. At the time, Ray was a young millwright working in a sugar factory, which meant that he was extremely crafty and strong, and yes, good with his hands. He grew up in the woods as sort of this camper, hunter, fisherman type. By all accounts, Ray and Daniela bonded over their shared love for dogs, for adventures, and specifically for the outdoors. By 1982, they were married, and they began to build their life together in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. For the next 3 decades, Ray and Daniela's lives were pretty normal. No one would have guessed that someday they'd be at the center of one of Canada's most disturbing outdoor mysteries. They often took time off work to go camping, and one of Ray's favorite places to visit was Harrison Lake, which is about an 1.5-hour drive from the city. And by the way, I say that it was Ray's favorite and not Daniela's favorite because Harrison Lake is just kind of a beast of an area. I don't know how else to say it. First of all, the lake itself is freezing cold most of the year, even in the summer. And, it's technically safe to swim in during the warmer months, but danger still lurks at the bottom. And not necessarily from predators, but from giant 500-foot drops that happen out of absolutely nowhere. And as if this wasn't enough, surrounding the lake is miles and miles of rough forested terrain without any cell service whatsoever. It's about as off the grid as you can possibly get, but according to Daniela, Ray always felt more at home in the bush than anywhere else. And honestly, despite the fact that I make all these videos, that's something I can relate to myself, and it's something that Daniela wasn't offended by. You see, Ray was just an outdoorsy guy. He loved a challenge, and he obsessed over having all the right gear for any situation. In fact, he actually preferred going out there alone, which is something that I can't relate with as much. I mean, I'll do it, but it's not my favorite. And when I say alone, I guess technically he's not completely alone because he always brought his dogs along with him. Their names were Elmer and Bandit. And so while going alone in the wilderness isn't really my favorite way of doing it, I also do understand why people do it. It can be very freeing, assuming nothing goes wrong. But one thing that I don't really understand is why Ray kept going back to Harrison Lake over and over, despite the fact that he had apparently run into a number of sketchy characters there over the years. Now, these stories are largely anecdotal, but apparently in the 1990s and early 2000s, Ray saw multiple drug deals go down in these woods, and he knew to never get involved or break them up, but it was clear to him very early on that Harrison Lake was a place that some people went to, when they didn't really want to be watched. And again, allegedly, as the years passed, these sketchy campers would get more and more brazen, and this made it more difficult for Ray to just kind of ignore them, right? In one instance, and again, this is just secondhand information, there was apparently a group of gang members who were shooting semi-automatic rifles late into the night right next to Ray's campsite. And Ray, who was just out there trying to get some sleep, finally hit his breaking point and went over to ask them to, maybe stop shooting their guns for the night. But instead of putting their firearms down, they apparently pointed them at Ray and threatened to rob his campsite if he didn't leave immediately, which is illegal, obviously, and crazy. Like, if it were me, I would not go back to Harrison Lake ever again after something like that. But Ray would tell these stories to his friends and family almost like they were jokes. And again, he probably was exaggerating a little bit, but clearly at least some sketchy stuff went down. And also, clearly, Ray was not easily scared. He never even reported these things to the police. And I think that speaks to his confidence in his abilities and also his intuition. It really does seem to me that Ray felt like nothing ever truly bad would happen to him in the woods, and that he could always kind of maneuver out of a sketchy situation and ultimately turn it into a future campfire story. But what happened to Ray in June of 2013 wasn't a story that Ray ever got to tell. Instead, it would be the police telling it. And to a lot of people, including some that were very close to Ray, the police's version didn't really make sense. Hold on to that thought. We're actually going to come right back to it. But first, a quick personal story that's painfully relevant to being off-grid. We've all woken up in the morning with a sore throat or a fever and kind of thought, great, I suddenly feel terrible and I'm gonna have to miss work, scramble for a doctor's appointment, or waste half my day sitting in urgent care. Well, a few months ago, I found myself in that situation right before a backcountry canoeing trip. I was about to leave, like we were leaving that day, when all of a sudden I noticed a small infection on my leg, and because I was about to be off-grid for a week, I had to make a last-minute urgent care run to get antibiotics just in case the infection got worse. This almost derailed the entire trip. But if I'd had the medical emergency kit from the wellness company, who happens to be the sponsor of this video, I could have opened it up, used the doctor recommended guidebook, and handled things right away at home. You see, this isn't just a first aid kit. It's basically a mini urgent care at your fingertips whenever you need it. Inside are 8 core medications, including ivermectin, a generic Z-Pak, amoxicillin, and a lot more, covering over 30 common conditions such as animal bites, UTIs, and sinus infections. So that's right, no waiting rooms, no pharmacy lines, just the right medicine at the right time when you need it. And honestly, I think every outdoor enthusiast should have one of these, especially those of you who value being self-sufficient. And if you're worried about expiration dates, let me assure you that a US military study published in the National Library of Medicine found that 90% of 100+ core meds stayed safe and effective for up to 15 years past their listed expiration dates. Ordering your kit is caveman simple. At checkout, you fill out a short intake form and a licensed doctor reviews and fills your prescriptions. And then your kit shows up in about a week. Super easy. So head to twc.health/hiking or click the link at the top of the description and use code hiking to save $30 off plus free shipping. Don't let illness catch you off guard, because the only thing worse than being sick is being sick and still having to put on real pants to go to the doctors. Kits available to US residents only. Okay, let's get back to the story. In May of 2013, Ray told Daniela that he would be taking their 2 dogs, Elmer and Bandit, on a week or so trip to Harrison Lake. He was planning on going just, a few days later in the early part of June. And Daniela was welcome to come like she always was, but lately she was kind of excusing herself from most camping trips. She told Ray that she had kind of just outgrown Harrison Lake, and honestly, I don't really blame her. Daniela was at retirement age, and while part of her hesitation was surely because she just wasn't up for these rugged nature trips anymore, I suspect that under the surface, maybe even subconsciously, she almost knew that these trips were becoming less and less safe. I mean, how could you not feel that way after some of the stories that Ray had told her? Before Ray left, Daniela made her husband check that he had all the right gear with him, and at 65 years old, Ray was still able to put together quite the equipment list. Beyond the usual camping stuff, some of the other key things that Ray brought out to Harrison Lake were a life jacket, a first aid kit, a motorized inflatable raft, and several firearms. These are very important things to remember. They're going to come up very soon. Oh, and if you think that bringing more than one gun feels a little extra to you, well, it probably is for most people, but for Ray, this was just business as usual. He was an expert in the wilderness after all, and he just liked the feeling of knowing that he had all the protection he could possibly need against any possible thing that could go wrong. On May 28th, 2013, Ray kissed Daniela goodbye, believing that he would only be gone for about a week. He never gave Daniela an exact return date, but again, after 30 years of marriage, Ray was always home well before the time that Daniela got to worrying. But for the first time in 3 decades, that was about to change. Over the next week or so, Ray would spend the majority of his time alone, enjoying nature, and of course, enjoying the company of his 2 dogs. Every time that he left his main campsite, he would take the dogs with him. Despite being in his 60s, Ray was a super active guy. He was taking long hikes, searching for old gold mines, and fishing pretty much every single day. A couple times during this trip, Ray would even invite his friend, John Miles, to join him out there on an adventure into the woods. And on the last day of this trip, Ray was actually planning to meet John at the shore of Harrison Lake. From there, they would take the inflatable raft out onto the water together. That plan was all set up to happen on the morning of June 10th, 2013. But before we get into the events of that morning, we actually have to zoom in on the night prior, June 9th. At first, it was pretty much like any other night on Harrison Lake. It was summertime, and so it was relatively warm out. There was a graduation party with a bunch of college kids hanging out, drinking beers along the shore of the lake. There was families camping in RVs, and plenty of cars driving in and out of the designated camping area. Again, this is a really remote spot, but on this particular weekend, there was a decent amount of people, at least for Harrison Lake standards. But all the noise of the people and the parties was quickly silenced by 6 terrifying, unmistakable sounds. And you know what I'm talking about. Gunshots. They rang out in 2 rounds of 3, and they could be heard all throughout the dark woods of Harrison Lake, even across the water. And like I mentioned earlier, people started panicking. A call came into the local police station that a passing car's headlight had been shot out by one of these bullets, and then another call came in that 2 bullets struck the side of a family's RV. And so the police swarmed the area, they moved out into the woods, and they thought that they were gonna come across someone who was like armed and dangerous. They even closed in on the area that they thought the gunshots were coming from, and this was a secluded part of the forest with what looked like a truck parked in the middle of it. In their minds, it could have been something truly horrible that they were walking into that night. But as you know, when they arrived at the scene, it wasn't nearly as dramatic as what they imagined, at least not on the surface. It was just this picture: a truck with a camper attached to its back, parked next to a campsite with 1 chair left out by the unlit fire pit. As the police closed in on the camper, guns drawn, one of them rustled a leaf. They made a little bit too much noise. And that's when they were startled by a brand new sound. Not gunshots, but barking, which came from inside the locked camper connected to the truck. When police opened up the truck, 2 dogs came out, and it didn't appear that they had been locked in there for all that long. The police then started to look through what else had been left behind in the camper, and they found a life jacket, the uninflated raft/boat, and several possessions belonging to Ray Salmen. But again, they didn't find any firearms, and Ray was known to have a couple of them with him, and of course they didn't find Ray himself. So what's going on there? At around 5 a.m. the following morning, John Miles, who had heard the report of gunshots at Harrison Lake, tried calling the local police. He was worried about his friend, Ray Salmen, of course. I mean, John knew that Ray was out there camping because they had made plans to raft for that day, and he wanted to make sure that the area was still safe for them to meet up. But when John finally got a hold of the police station, all he got from them was a blunt and shocking piece of information. And that was that Ray Salmen was a missing person. When this news reached Ray's wife, Daniela, later that morning, she actually wasn't that worried about her husband, which, you know, it sounds kind of crazy, but I guess when you've been married to someone for decades, someone who's an expert in the wilderness, maybe it just takes more than going missing for a couple hours to freak out. Or maybe she was in denial. I don't know. And either way, the search party that was organized clearly was not in denial that something serious was wrong and that Ray was somehow involved, right? From minute one of this investigation, the crew was very heavy duty by any definition. It included members from the police force as well as members from a highly tactical emergency response team and a full canine unit as well. Some people on this crew were even carrying fully automatic rifles, which feels like a lot for just one single missing person. I told you at the beginning of the video, like I've covered a lot of wilderness searches on this channel, and pretty much from the first minute of this search, something was just different. Now, you have to remember that Ray had never proven to be a danger to anyone. And while I'm sure that having a fully armed search team was just done out of an abundance of caution, I don't know, it definitely felt like overkill, no pun intended, because for the first 24 hours, they did not find anything relating to Ray's disappearance. After a full day of searching for Ray, one of the heads of this search crew, Corporal Lee Van Nieuwenhuizen, said that they had 0 leads. And separately, he also noted that they could not confirm that the report of gunfire in the area was even linked to Ray's disappearance at all. And there were some other odd details that the initial investigators were picking up as well. Things that stuck out as just not right, you know? For instance, when police told Daniela that Elmer and Bandit, the 2 dogs, had been found locked in the camper, she was stunned because Ray had never done that ever before. Ray never left camp without the dogs, and he would never lock them in there and then wander off somewhere else, right? The only time he would do something even resembling that would be if there was a bear around, and even then, he wouldn't leave the campsite. He wouldn't abandon the dogs. He would remain at the campsite on lookout. To Daniela, someone else was responsible for locking Elmer and Bandit in the camper. For his part, Corporal Van Nieuwenhuizen suggested 2 theories as to what could have happened. First, that Ray had been hiking somewhere dangerous and had fallen or been attacked, or second, that he had been doing some target practice before accidentally injuring himself. But still, these theories fail to explain why the dogs weren't with him, and as you're gonna see, that is a big problem. Oh, and speaking of dogs, remember that elite canine unit I mentioned a minute ago, the one they brought in to help the search? Well, something strange happened with them as well. The canines couldn't pick up a single scent of Ray's, despite having plenty of Ray's equipment lying around the campsite that they could, you know, get a scent off of. And that is very surprising. I mean, these units are trained to pick up scents that are like miles away. And so what the hell is going on here? It just became increasingly clear that this was going to be a way more complicated search and rescue than anyone had anticipated, and that meant the authorities needed even more support than they already brought. And so now, in addition to the on-foot search team, there was a helicopter scanning the terrain from above, there were ATVs rumbling through the woods, and there were police boats zooming around on the lake. And yet, despite all of this support, they were not finding anything having to do with Ray. No footprints, no blood, no gear, nothing. Well, that is until finally, after 3 long and disappointing days of extensive searching, they discovered something that was maybe a clue to finding Ray. And I say maybe because it's just not at all what you'd expect to find. On June 13th, which was the 4th full day of scouring Harrison Lake for any sign of Ray, the helicopter team saw something that looked out of place. They were searching the shoreline of the lake when someone spotted a secluded beach and something shiny sticking out from the surface. As they flew down to try and get a better look, they realized that it was a bunch of balloons tangled up in a tree about a quarter-mile north of Ray's campsite. Now, through all my research, I couldn't find out what type of balloons these were, and so they could have been emergency survival balloons used to send out SOS signals, but it's also not likely that Ray would have had these in his kit. I mean, they're just not a popular thing to carry. I've never heard of anyone carrying these, and so more likely, these were probably just some party balloons, perhaps left over from those kids who were hanging out in the woods. But regardless, if this was just a coincidental find by the helicopter crew, they got extremely lucky, because right below the balloons was the first real clue to solving this mystery. When the ground team reached the secluded beach near Ray's campsite, they were stunned by what they found. Literally right under where those balloons were positioned, they found Ray's backpack. It was just sitting there on the beach with almost like the balloons were marking its location. And this was the first real breakthrough that they had made in almost 4 days of searching, and it also wasn't the only one. Sitting there on the shore, they also found Ray's shoes, his socks, and his pants. And most shockingly, just a few feet down the shore, they found the piece of evidence that everyone had been wondering about. They found Ray's rifle, as well as several shell casings. This is where the case breaks wide open, because the streak of luck actually continued on for the search crew. Later that very same day, yet another discovery was made. They found Ray's pistol, which was lying in a meadow in a completely different area, almost as if he had left it there in a hurry, or maybe it was taken from him by someone else. This was a huge dump of evidence, all happening in just the course of a few hours. They basically went from 0 to 100 in terms of what they had on this case. And if you're like me, or you're invested in finding Ray Salmen, you're probably thinking like, okay, keep going. Keep searching for clues. I mean, we finally have some momentum here. Maybe the dogs could have finally gotten a scent from Ray's newly found backpack or his clothing and taken searchers deeper into the woods. The trail felt like it was hotter than ever. Well, folks, this is exactly when things started to get messy. Years after all of this went down, a search and rescue team member named Adam Palmer went on record to say that just after they had made these first huge discoveries, one corporal on the police's search team, who Adam didn't identify by name, instructed them not to search further in the woods. He had been told by his superior officer that the area was now unsearchable and that the police were already putting together an official statement as to what they believed happened to Ray Salmen. And this is just weird. Like, I just gotta say, I mean, it's kind of fishy to call off the search right after you made your biggest discoveries, but still haven't actually found the missing person. They didn't even give the dogs a chance to build a new scent trail. I don't know, it just feels like they were rushing to try to close this investigation before they had even completed the search. And look, I'm not gonna pretend that I know why this happened. All I'm saying is that the police's decisions didn't really match the moment. And so the story that the police had now crafted was that Ray injured himself or experienced some medical emergency while at that secluded beach. And it's important to know that this beach was kind of surrounded by tall rocks that would have been very difficult to scale. And so terrified that he couldn't get himself back to camp on his own, he tried everything he could think of to get the attention of someone else nearby. And so Ray fired 6 gunshots at light sources he saw off in the distance, 3 of them at a car driving by, and 3 of them at some RVs near a neighboring campsite. But no help ever came to Ray, and so eventually he took off his socks, his shoes, and his pants, and he attempted to swim back to his campsite. And I guess he must have decided to keep his shirt on while swimming, like he took everything else off but left the shirt. And I say that because they never found the shirt at the beach. And anyways, if you remember what I told you about Harrison Lake, it's quite large and it's freezing cold, even in the summertime. And also the water levels can go from being ankle high to hundreds of feet deep very quickly. And so the police concluded their story that while swimming back to his campsite, Ray drowned. And Thus, from that point on, all efforts would be focused on a search for Ray's body in the water. They would end the search in the woods completely. When the police called Daniela to tell her about the items they had found, and then to tell her the drowning story, she was at first devastated, obviously. But before she could recognize what the police said happened to Ray, she was starting to get all these questions. While the story that the police landed on explains the beach discoveries, kind of, it doesn't explain why the dogs were left behind or why they found Ray's pistol in a completely different area. Daniela obviously knew her husband better than anyone else, certainly better than the police did. And she knew that Ray would never leave his pistol sitting out in the wilderness unattended. She also knew that Ray would have never gone down to that beach without the dogs or without his life jacket for that matter. Remember, they found that in Ray's camper as well. And most importantly, she knew that Ray most definitely would not have tried to swim in a freezing cold lake at night. I mean, if he was really trapped on that beach, he would have known to wait until daylight, where he could then flag down a passing boat. You know, someone would have found him. And so she's wrestling with all these strange questions, but there was also only so much that she could do at this point. I mean, she kind of had to just take the police's word for what they were doing with the investigation. This was right in the middle of it, after all, and so Daniela was just trying to juggle all of this weird information with all of the emotions that her husband may not be coming home ever. After a few more days of searching on Harrison Lake, the weather flipped a switch, bringing in heavy rains. And when this happened, Daniela knew that it was only a matter of time until the police's search would be called off for good. And so Daniela now faced this new reality that Ray would not be coming home. And my goodness, I can't imagine how hard that would be. I mean, in her eyes, this could have never happened to someone like Ray. I mean, Ray had been doing this for years and years and years. He knew Harrison Lake like the back of his hand. I mean, what are the chances that he would die out there without her? Daniela had to break the news to Ray's brother, who was named Robert, and then to all of Ray's friends, which included John Miles, which is another thing that I can't even imagine having to do. But she's calling all these people, and they're talking about what happened. And as she started telling the story to them, or at least the police's version of the story, she quickly realized that the people who knew Ray the best were grasping onto some of the same exact questions and doubts that she had. They were also confused. And frankly, they weren't convinced. For example, about those gunshots. Ray's brother, and also some of Ray's hunting friends, told Daniela that anyone who spends enough time hunting in the wilderness knows that 3 gunshots in succession is a classic distress signal. These SOS gunshots are always aimed in a safe direction. And it's just weird because everyone knew Ray was this expert outdoorsman. I just don't think that he would have intentionally shot towards anyone, right? I mean, if he knew this distress signal, he would have known to shoot in a safe direction. He would never have shot towards a moving car or an occupied campsite. Like, that doesn't make sense. The story that the police had offered Daniela just had a lot of holes in it. Not only in the logic, but also in knowing who Ray was and what he would and would not have done. And so now the question wasn't just what the hell happened to Ray, but it was what the hell was happening during that crazy search effort. And Daniela was on a mission to find out. Flash forward to July 17th, about a month after the first search concluded. A new boat was in the water at Harrison Lake, this one belonging to Gene and Sandy Ralston. Now, the Ralstons are sort of like celebrities in the search and rescue community. They're a retired couple from Idaho who specialize in searching for underwater victims. They had a combination of the best sonar equipment at the time, as well as a natural knack for the work itself. Desperate people, like Daniela Salmen, turn to the Ralstons when all police efforts fail. And this is because the Ralstons have a shocking success rate in finding missing bodies. Just 3 weeks earlier, in fact, they had recovered the body of a man named Sid Neville, who was located almost 600 feet underwater. But now it was Ray's brother Robert and, of course, Daniela, who stood on the shoreline waiting for the Ralstons to unearth a miracle. And by the way, when they were waiting, they were accompanied, of course, by Ray's beloved dogs, Elmer and Bandit. Ray's loved ones would pace back and forth, emotionally draining themselves every time that the Ralstons' boat raced towards another potential find in the water. But day after day, they would come back with the same report. A lot of boulders and logs that look like bodies, but zero trace of Ray Salmen. But picture this. Every day that the Ralstons went out for another search, summer activities around Harrison Lake kind of went on as normal. No heightened police activity. I mean, you literally had kids swimming in the lake right near where they were looking for Ray's body, and college kids throwing huge parties right near the beach where they had found Ray's backpack, which kind of just strikes me as strange. Like, if the police had taken this investigation so seriously at the start with, you know, armed SWAT teams and helicopters and a canine unit, it just is weird that everyone in charge of Harrison Lake suddenly decided to just pretend like it didn't happen. I'm probably reading too much into this. I don't know. Daniela and Robert tried to quiet the noise as best they could, and they prayed for the Ralstons to find something, anything to keep their hopes up. But after weeks of searching, the Ralstons drove their boat back to the shore one final time and officially told Daniela and Robert that they were dumbfounded. With all of the resources they had thrown at this case, the Ralstons expected to at least find something, you know, maybe a piece of equipment, Ray's shirt, I don't know, anything, right? But they had found nothing, and so now everyone's mind began to turn to more far-fetched, even darker theories. They searched this lake so heavily, but they didn't find anything at all. And so, what if the police's story was wrong and Ray's body wasn't even in the lake? Everyone who was wondering this now looked to Daniela for her next move. And by all accounts, Daniela was kind of paralyzed with grief. I mean, she didn't know what to do next. And this just breaks my heart, man. Daniela had no relief of finding her husband's body, no relief of a plausible or believable story, and certainly no relief of closure in this tragedy. Remember, nothing bad, like truly bad, had ever happened to Ray in the hundreds of times he went out into the wilderness. And now Daniela had to get comfortable, or as comfortable as you possibly can, with the idea that she would never see her husband again, dead or alive. But still, a lot of people felt like something was still off here. Like either the police were flat out wrong in their theory, or even that they were lying. I don't know. People that were close to Ray just couldn't accept the idea that he had locked the dogs in the camper, left them there, and then never came back. And so for a third time, despite having police forces, canine units, government-trained search teams, and private underwater specialists, the question remained, what the hell happened to Ray? And for years, this case went cold. But this just didn't sit right with Daniela. She asked the local police for any more information that they could possibly share, but they told her that it was basically a dead end. And so she then filed a request to the Canadian government to get the official report from the search effort for Ray. But when she did this, maybe one of the stranger updates in this entire story came back. The report that she received had many blacked out redacted paragraphs, which, you know, it's not unheard of when the government releases reports like this to, you know, redact a bunch of stuff. But my question is, what about this case specifically needed to be redacted? I mean, according to the police themselves, this was just the case of a man who drowned in a lake. Like, they weren't alleging, at least publicly, that any crime took place. Like, I don't know what they could have been hiding about Ray and his disappearance. And it makes me wonder, is it possible that there actually was some foul play here? Now, a couple small details have stood out to me more than others, and I think they're important to highlight here. And so earlier in the video, you might have missed it, I told you that Ray wasn't just spending the week at Harrison Lake hiking and fishing, but he was also looking for abandoned gold mines. Now, the area around Harrison Lake has a lot of precious minerals like quartz and, of course, gold. In the 1800s, there were active mines full of treasures, and there's even one legend of Slumax gold, which many Canadians believe is hidden away somewhere in the region. Ray was most definitely not alone in his interest with these mines and legends, and so is it possible that he found something that he shouldn't have, whether an abandoned mine or an old prospector's stash of gold, and he had to be, you know, taken care of because of this? And look, that would have to be an insane cover-up, and it's probably not even worth speculating any further, but I don't know. Even in 2025, some abandoned gold mines are being discovered still in the mountains not that far from Harrison Lake, and the amount of wealth that one person might find in these mines or one of these hidden gold piles, well, it would be monumental. But again, that is wild speculation. It's almost certainly not true, and I'm definitely not accusing anyone of anything here. All I'm saying is that when you stack all of the anomalies in this case, the official story that the police told really starts to feel less like an explanation and more like a way to end the conversation. And when you have these kinds of details that stick out from the rest of the logic, well, they really do matter, especially when a case is as wide open as Ray's. And another detail is, of course, those run-ins that Ray had with strange people around the lake. It's possible that something bloody went down, which could explain why those gunshots weren't aimed in a safe direction, but instead towards cars and campers. But then, I mean, you have to think that there would have been some trace of violent activity beyond just the gunshots. There wasn't even a drop of blood discovered anywhere, at least as far as I'm aware. And according to Ray's brother, Robert, Ray was smart enough not to get involved with these sketchy people. Now, there's one more element that I want to tell you about, and this is one that I almost didn't even include because it sounded just too out there, even for this channel. But I don't know, we're already speculating. So in 2022, there was a project called Missing 411, the UFO Connection, and of course it was by David Paulides. In this project, they covered Ray's disappearance with interviews from a lot of people we've already talked about, right? Adam Palmer from Search and Rescue, you know, the guy raising protocol questions, John Miles, again, Ray's friend that he was supposed to meet to go rafting that morning that he disappeared, Gene Ralston, the underwater specialist, and most importantly, Ray's wife, Daniela. And according to Daniela, the documentary's version lines up with what I've told you so far, except for one massive plot line that they included, which I haven't told you about yet. Daniela takes it all the way back to 1990 at Fire Lake in Quebec. And it's there that apparently she and Ray were camping and they saw this bright light rip across the lake. Now, Daniela thought it might be loggers, but Ray was adamant that this could not be true. There were no roads around, and this light was way brighter than any vehicle's headlights. The light then starts doing some weird stuff, twisting, turning. It's totally silent. It was almost like it was scanning the shoreline for 10 minutes straight. And look, no disrespect to any of you guys out there. I've never really talked about aliens on this channel because it's just not my thing, not my vibe. However, this story is so wide open and baffling that, I mean, I at least had to acknowledge this angle, right? Especially when you stack it with other odd details that people point to, like an old 1960 report in the Harrison Lake region about a cylindrical UFO. Also, the fact that Fire Lake was tied to a major gold operation, the fact that the dogs never got a scent off of Ray's camp, and the even bigger one, the fact that there was no blood, no struggle, no sign of a fight, almost like Ray was just gone in an instant. I don't know, man. It feels a little nuts even saying this out loud, but that documentary is real, and you're welcome to watch it and make up your own mind. For me, it just seems like if the police's drowning story is so clear, then why does the paperwork of the report read like a classified state secret with a bunch of stuff redacted? And I'm asking that genuinely. I definitely might just be missing something here. I don't work in law enforcement after all. While to my knowledge, there are no official investigations planned for the future, I do hope that anyone going to Harrison Lake keeps this story in mind, because it's possible that you might pick up a piece of evidence that the canines, the police, or even the Canadian government might have missed or may have ignored all those years ago. And so if you enjoy Wilderness Mysteries, be sure to subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss any of our future videos. I really appreciate all of you watching, especially if you made it all the way to the end. Please be respectful in the comments section. Remember, these are real stories about real people, and YouTube seems to think you'll enjoy watching this video next, and so give it a click. And yeah, I'll see all of you in the next one.